Mark Reynolds and Sofia Vasquez had been living in the shadows for years, invisible, yet untouchable. One ran the docks with quiet authority, the other orchestrated shipments across continents with chilling precision. Together, they controlled a cocaine network, so vast that tons of the drug flowed into Liverpool unnoticed, until the investigators began to close in. Liverpool's port was a city within a city, a sprawling maze of cranes, warehouses, and endless lines of shipping containers stretching toward the horizon. By day, it thrummed with activity. Forklifts moved pallets, trucks roared along the quay, and workers shouted instructions over the roar of diesel engines. By night the port became quieter, almost eerie, yet the constant hum of the river reminded anyone nearby that movement never truly stopped. For decades, this hub had been a gateway for commerce, bringing goods from around the world to the city's doorstep. But beneath the surface of ordinary trade, something far darker was stirring. The first hint came not from a dramatic discovery, but from a series of small anomalies that barely registered in the busy lives of customs officers. Containers arrived on schedule, their paperwork immaculate, seals unbroken, yet subtle irregularities began to accumulate. Crates weighed slightly more than they should, shipping manifests included vague or generic descriptions, and the patterns of certain shipments seemed to repeat too precisely to be coincidence. At first these inconsistencies were dismissed as minor errors, an overstretched system dealing with thousands of containers a week, but over time, the irregularities became impossible to ignore. Investigators soon realized they were dealing with something far more serious than clerical mistakes. A routine inspection revealed a hidden compartment within a crate labeled as machinery. Inside, neatly wrapped bundles of white powder sat concealed beneath layers of cardboard and packing material. At first, the volume seemed almost unbelievable, and when tested, the substance confirmed everyone's worst suspicion: cocaine. What followed was a chilling realization. These were not isolated shipments. Each container brought in more of the same, carefully hidden, meticulously planned and arriving with clockwork precision. The network behind these shipments was sophisticated, organized, and astonishingly bold. The audacity of the smugglers sent ripples of shock through law enforcement. This was not the work of desperate criminals or small-time traffickers. This was an operation that treated smuggling as a business, a calculated enterprise designed to avoid detection at every turn. Investigators began to piece together the scale of the operation. Tons of cocaine were slipping through the port, each shipment carefully timed and routed to maximize profit and minimize risk. It became clear that the city itself had become a critical hub in a transatlantic drug pipeline, a place where hidden compartments and forged documents allowed criminals to bypass even the strictest security measures. As the authorities delved deeper, they discovered another layer of the operation's sophistication, a network of insiders embedded within the port itself. Employees with access to sensitive areas provided critical intelligence to the traffickers. They knew which containers would be inspected, which shipping routes were most scrutinized, and how to manipulate documentation to avoid raising suspicion. Every step of the smuggling process relied on secrecy, coordination, and trust between criminals and their co-opted allies. The level of organization stunned investigators. This was a machine built to operate in plain sight, yet invisible to the untrained eye. The discovery of the first shipments was only the beginning. Investigators soon realized that the cocaine arriving in Liverpool was part of a larger, international network. Routes stretched across continents, connecting South America to Europe with precise timing and careful planning. Each container was a thread in a complex web that spanned oceans, ports, and borders. The challenge for law enforcement was daunting. To dismantle the operation, they would have to unravel an intricate system of secrecy, corruption, and careful deception. For the residents of Liverpool, life continued as usual. Trucks delivered goods, ships docked and departed, and the city remained unaware of the invisible tide moving beneath the surface. But the quiet efficiency of the port masked a dangerous reality. Beneath the ordinary rhythm of commerce, a shadow world was thriving, moving tons of cocaine into the city with precision and cunning. And until the investigators could intervene, Liverpool remained in the grip of a silent, relentless threat. The port of Liverpool had always been a place of industry and noise, but as investigators delved deeper into the cocaine shipments, it became clear that some corners of the dockyard were not what they seemed. What had first appeared as clever smuggling now revealed a far more disturbing truth. The traffickers had allies on the inside. Longtime port workers, those who should have been guardians of security, were quietly helping the operation. They provided schedules, gave access to restricted areas, and sometimes even covered for suspicious activity. The authorities had assumed the port was secure, but the reality was that a shadow network operated right beneath the surface, moving cocaine in plain sight. The scale of the corruption stunned investigators. Small oversights in records and missing paperwork, which could have been dismissed as clerical mistakes, were now part of a pattern. Employees at multiple levels were quietly aiding the smugglers, either through bribery, threats, or promises of a share of the profits. Every container that arrived on the docks seemed to pass through a carefully choreographed routine designed to avoid detection. It was like watching a giant machine in motion, each cog perfectly aligned to ensure that illicit goods could slip through unnoticed. Investigators spent hours poring over surveillance footage, but even cameras that monitored key areas offered little help. Employees knew exactly where to walk, what to touch, and when to appear busy so as not to draw attention. Computer records were manipulated to make containers appear ordinary. Each false entry, each altered log, made the web of deception even more complex. The smugglers were not only moving drugs, they were moving through an invisible network of trust, secrecy, and fear, one that law enforcement could see only in fragments. It was clear that this operation was designed to be resilient. The traffickers anticipated problems and created contingency plans for every possible obstacle. When one shipment risked being intercepted, another was rerouted through a different port, often with the help of insiders who knew exactly where law enforcement's attention would be weakest. The network was highly adaptable, able to adjust routes, timing, and even personnel at a moment's notice. It was a criminal enterprise that treated each shipment like a strategic mission, each container a prize in a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. The human element was as dangerous as the logistics. Some insiders were deeply embedded, trusted for years, while others were opportunistic, willing to betray colleagues for a quick payoff. The network seemed to blend ordinary workers and hardened criminals so seamlessly that distinguishing between them became nearly impossible. Investigators realized that even a small slip by a single employee could bring the entire system crashing down. The complexity of the operation made it clear that catching the smugglers would require not only persistence but also patience and careful strategy. Meanwhile, the city of Liverpool remained largely unaware of the storm moving beneath its docks. Ships arrived and departed, cranes lifted cargo, and the river continued its endless flow. But behind the scenes, law enforcement was piecing together the clues that would expose the operation. Each intercepted message, each irregular shipment, revealed part of a puzzle that stretched from the warehouses of the port to the streets of Europe. The investigation was no longer just about stopping a few shipments. It was about dismantling a network that had operated in shadows for years. With every passing day, the stakes grew higher. The smugglers were bold, sophisticated, and always moving. The port that had once symbolized trade and opportunity had become a battlefield where law enforcement fought an invisible enemy. The cocaine flowed silently, the shadows stretched longer, and the city unknowingly teetered on the edge of a criminal empire built on secrecy, betrayal, and ambition. Until the investigators could unravel the network completely, Liverpool's docks remained a place where shadows moved freely, and the next shipment could arrive at any moment, unseen and unstoppable. As investigators unraveled the threads of the Liverpool cocaine network, it became clear that the operation stretched far beyond the city's docks. What had once seemed like a local problem was, in reality, part of a sophisticated European web. Shipments originated thousands of miles away in South America, carefully packed and hidden within ordinary cargo. From there they traveled across the Atlantic to ports in Spain, the Netherlands, and Belgium, each location serving as a crucial link in the chain. Liverpool was not the starting point. It was the final destination, the place where carefully orchestrated logistics met the city's streets. Each leg of the journey was planned with military-like precision. Containers were tracked, schedules adjusted, and personnel coordinated to avoid scrutiny. The smugglers relied heavily on technology. Encrypted messaging apps, secure networks, and coded language allowed them to communicate without fear of interception. Even when a shipment was delayed or inspected unexpectedly, they had backup plans ready, rerouting containers to secondary ports or holding them until the coast was clear. Law enforcement realized they were chasing ghosts across continents, each move carefully calculated to stay one step ahead. The European network added layers of complexity that challenged even experienced investigators. A shipment leaving Brazil might travel through Rotterdam, stop briefly in Antwerp, then move by truck through France before arriving in Liverpool. At each stop, insiders ensured smooth passage. Port workers, transport drivers, and cocaine flowing through its docks was not just a local problem, it was a symptom of a vast, interconnected system. Streets, warehouses, and neighborhoods could feel the effects long before authorities could intercept shipments. But behind the scenes, law enforcement was learning the rules of this dangerous game, mapping the routes, decoding the encrypted messages, and slowly closing in. The shadows were vast and elusive, stretching across oceans and borders, but each clue brought the investigators one step closer to exposing the full scale of the operation. Liverpool, with its historic docks and sprawling port, had become the final stage of a continental crime drama, where precision, secrecy, and risk collided. The European web was both a shield and a weakness for the smugglers, and unraveling it would require patience, strategy, and relentless determination. The city itself remained unaware that every container, every shipment, was part of a story moving in silence, one that was about to be brought into the light. Even the most meticulously planned operations eventually leave traces, and the Liverpool Cocaine Network was no exception. Despite the smugglers' skill, investigators began to notice small but telling errors. A container mislabeled by a nervous dock worker drew attention, though at first it seemed insignificant. A slight delay in a shipping schedule, an unusual handling pattern, a fleeting glimpse of someone unfamiliar on the docks. All these fragments began to form a picture. What had once appeared flawless was now showing vulnerability. For the authorities, every mistake was a clue, a crack in the carefully constructed facade of secrecy. Law enforcement stepped up surveillance, watching the docks at all hours. They observed employees acting with quiet urgency, taking routes, and using access points that, until recently, had gone unnoticed. Cameras, logs, and motion sensors revealed subtle patterns of movement, shifts in behavior that hinted at complicity. Each anomaly became a piece of a larger puzzle. The investigators realized that catching the network would not be about luck or chance. It would require meticulous patience and careful analysis of the smallest detail. The breakthrough came through technology. Encrypted messages, once impossible to decipher, were slowly decrypted with a combination of forensic analysis and cyber expertise. Investigators gained access to schedules, shipment codes, and key players' instructions. Every message revealed another layer of the operation: routes through Spain, diversion strategies, hidden compartments in containers, and the names of insiders embedded at every stage. The smugglers had relied on secrecy as their greatest weapon, but secrecy can be broken, and the authorities were beginning to exploit the weaknesses in their communications. As the investigation intensified, law enforcement mapped the hierarchy of the network. Some insiders were minor players, moving shipments or manipulating paperwork for small payments. Others occupied positions of significant influence, controlling entire segments of the port, directing staff and coordinating the timing of shipments. Each revelation deepened the understanding of the network's complexity, and each arrest plan had to be executed with precision to avoid alerting other members. One misstep could send the operation into hiding for months, undoing weeks of painstaking work. Even with the information now in hand, the network remained dangerous. Smugglers adapted quickly. Sudden changes in shipping routes or the use of decoy containers kept authorities on high alert. Investigators had to anticipate moves, predicting actions based on patterns and partial intelligence. It was a delicate balance of strategy and timing. Law enforcement had learned to think like the criminals, tracking shadows, reading behavior, and calculating risk with almost surgical accuracy. The investigation had become a high-stakes game, where patience and observation were as critical as force and authority. The human cost was also evident. Employees involved in the operation lived under pressure and fear, some aware that their complicity could lead to serious prison sentences. Investigators had to navigate this human terrain carefully, leveraging cooperation without exposing witnesses prematurely. Every conversation, every piece of intelligence collected, carried weight. The stakes were no longer theoretical. Arrests, seizures, and the threat of exposure loomed over every participant, from low-level helpers to those orchestrating operations from afar. By the time authorities were ready to act, the network was fully exposed. The decrypted messages had revealed the scope of the operation: container movements, insider names, European routes, and contingency plans. What had been a nearly invisible criminal empire operating in silence now had vulnerabilities laid bare. The port that had once been a haven for smugglers was no longer impenetrable. The shadows were shrinking, and the city was about to witness the first major blows against a network that had moved cocaine with chilling efficiency for months. Liverpool's docks, once a place of commerce and routine, had become the theater of a carefully orchestrated investigation. Every misstep by the smugglers, every decrypted message, and every suspicious movement had brought law enforcement closer to their target. The operation was unraveling, one link at a time, revealing the inner workings of a criminal empire that had thrived in the shadows. The stage was set for the final confrontation, where the hidden machinery of smuggling would be laid bare, and the city would finally see the scale of the network that had lurked in its midst. The final phase of the investigation brought months of careful planning to a head. Law enforcement had mapped the network down to its smallest details: shipping schedules, container contents, insider roles, and European transit routes. With this intelligence, authorities coordinated a series of simultaneous raids, striking warehouses, storage facilities, and homes linked to the smugglers. Every move was precise, every step calculated to prevent leaks and ensure maximum impact. The city of Liverpool, largely unaware of the danger beneath its streets and docks, was about to witness the first visible signs of a battle that had raged silently for months. Containers that had once passed through the port with impunity were now targets. Dozens were intercepted before they could reach their intended destinations, each one revealing bundles of cocaine hidden beneath ordinary cargo. The sheer scale of the operation stunned investigators. Some shipments contained hundreds of kilograms, others revealed secret compartments so ingeniously constructed that they had gone unnoticed for months. Each seizure was a revelation, exposing the meticulous craftsmanship and daring planning behind the smuggling network. The raids also revealed the human dimension of the criminal enterprise. Insider employees who had once provided information and protection to smugglers were arrested, their complicity now undeniable. Some attempted to flee, others resisted, but law enforcement had anticipated these reactions. The network's leaders, who had remained distant and largely invisible, were now exposed through the decrypted messages and tracking intelligence. Arrests were made in multiple cities, extending beyond Liverpool to other European locations that had served as key transit points. For the first time, the full scope of the operation was coming into view. As the investigation culminated, the city of Liverpool finally began to grasp the enormity of what had been happening in its midst. Streets that seemed ordinary were linked to hidden criminal channels. Warehouses and docks that appeared mundane were key nodes in a vast cocaine pipeline. Millions of pounds worth of drugs had moved through the port before law enforcement intervened, and the human and financial stakes were enormous. The revelation left a lingering sense of disbelief. A criminal empire had operated silently, efficiently, and with chilling precision, exploiting both human weakness and systemic vulnerabilities. Yet, despite the arrests and seizures, the story also revealed a sobering reality. The network's infrastructure had been resilient. Containers intercepted were only a portion of the cocaine that had passed through Liverpool. Some insiders had eluded capture, and parts of the operation had already adapted to law enforcement scrutiny. The city had been spared the worst of it, but the shadows remained, a reminder that organized crime often evolves faster than the systems designed to stop it. The operation's dismantling was a victory, but not a complete end. In the aftermath, investigators reflected on the scale, coordination and audacity of the network. It was a lesson in persistence, patience, and strategy. Months of surveillance, pattern analysis, and decryption had been required to dismantle an operation that had thrived in the open. The port, once a quiet backdrop to global trade, had been a stage for an invisible war between smugglers and authorities. The city had glimpsed only the surface, but the full story revealed the meticulous planning, insider corruption, and European connections that had made the network formidable. Liverpool's docks returned to their familiar rhythm, but the impact of the operation lingered. The arrests and seizures had disrupted a criminal empire. Yet the investigation underscored how deeply shadows could infiltrate even the busiest ports. For the public, the revelation was shocking, almost cinematic in scale. For law enforcement, it was a reminder that vigilance, intelligence, and strategic action were the only tools capable of countering organized crime operating in the shadows. The city had been spared only through the determination and foresight of those who refused to let the network remain invisible. The cocaine network, that had haunted Liverpool's docks for months, was finally exposed. Its leaders in custody, its shipments encrypted, and its secrets revealed. Yet the story left a lingering question. In a world of sprawling ports, encrypted messages, and sophisticated logistics, how many shadows still move unseen, waiting for the right moment to strike? The answer remained unknown, a final reminder that the fight against organized crime is never truly over.